The Mask of Satan, also known as Black Sunday, was released in 1960. It helped establish Mario Bava as a director who would eventually become a significant figure in the Italian horror genre. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So this is an interesting one for me because this wasn't a film that I have actually been hideously familiar with throughout my time watching horror films. I believe I'd only actually watched the film once, really, since I'd only watched it the first time, and that was it. It's a special film to me because it, I believe, is the first ever Italian horror film I actually watched. When I was in my teens, went on a bit of a spurge, buying horror films, and this one looked sufficiently interesting to me. I didn't have any context for the director that Mario Bava was, or the uniqueness of the Italian horror film, or anything like that. And I think that it's just, my understanding is this is probably the film that really established Mario Bava for what he would eventually become. He's now considered these days to be a bit of an auteur, and he obviously had a very significant career. I think one thing that I initially struggled with the first time I'd watched it was the dubbing process. It's not exactly the same kind of production as all of the other, the things that we would most readily associate with the Italian horror film, right? It's a Gothic horror film, and it's shot in black and white. But nonetheless, I think the dubbing and the acting quality, acting style, certainly helps to locate it, I think, within that genre. But I think what's fascinating about this one, and obviously this is called the Italian Horror Guy podcast. This is horror in its purest traditional, or most traditional sort of form. I think it's very dark themed, but it's also, I wouldn't quite say tongue in cheek, but in many ways it's actually a very fun film. It's often very difficult to watch films from this era and really necessarily, I think, comprehend exactly what the aimed tone of the film was, because very quickly I think things in that traditional, almost melodramatic Gothic horror style can feel like it was maybe tongue-in-cheek the whole time, or maybe the melodrama doesn't date particularly well, or something like that. But nonetheless, within the context of it being a little bit melodramatic, and from what I can tell, a relatively low budget, I think that it still is very, very effective as a horror film, because as much as, some of the imagery, or some of the sets are maybe feel very much like sets, I think there are still some pretty genuinely cool and uncomfortable moments in this film. So, what is, I think, possibly one of the most effective aspects of this film is the opening scene. It feels it throws you right into that sort of Gothic horror context, with the voiceover talking, I believe it's a place called Moldavia. I don't know if that's an actual place, or hang on, let's have a look. Let's have a look on Wikipedia, actually. What is it? Okay, it was a Romanian principality. Okay. So it's set, this initial scene, I think, is set in 1630, and then the events of the film happen that night 2 centuries later in 1830. So I don't know if the listeners agree with this, but I've often found watching films that are old for us that also have that are also dated to a different era to be really interesting, and maybe I don't know. I remember like watching even Mary Poppins as a kid, right? And they dated back to 1910 in one of the songs, and obviously it's about the suffragettes and all that. So as I grew up, I understood it a bit more. That it's interesting because it's already an old film, and it's also a different place, that you don't instantly recognize it as like these are 1910 settings, or so because we're watching this black and white 1960 horror film. It's without the explanation. It's not immediately obvious when it would be set, and to go, it's like, okay, so it's a 1960 film set in 1830, but the initial scene is from 1630, and in many ways it's like that opening scene doesn't feel any different, right? Because the setting doesn't sort of indicate that it's any different other than the voiceover explaining what happens. But nonetheless, I won't go on about that anymore. This initial scene is just so damn cool, right? It's very very. Look, I think a lot of the context, a lot of the our sort of, I guess, understanding of like the witch burnings and the witch trials of the 1600s. In a lot of ways, I think it's something that's actually quite easily depicted. Our image of it is very much this sort of, capital punishment, sort of uncompromising, destructive, hate-filled sort of, very aggressive thing that this film does a really good job at depicting, I think. So, if memory serves, I think the person who seems to be making the decision on Asa Vaida, the antagonist of the film, whose spirit lives on in various characters in 1830, when the majority of the film is set, he sentences her to death, or at least reads the last rites or whatever. And I guess that sort of affirms the voiceover to contextualize what the time was, that a lot of people were dobbing in their brothers and uncles and fathers and sons and all that kind of thing. And there's just something so incredibly evil about the way that they kill her. That, I must say, is a very, very effective shot, right? And I think it really sort of proves just how effective you can make horror films, or films in general, by effective and sort of resourceful ways of doing things. So they have the mask that has the spikes in it, and the method really by which they make this, I guess, really feel like it's a terrifying thing, is the way they have a close-up of the camera as it's a close-up of the mask, like a fairly severe close-up, which really sort of shows the extent of the spikes as it's moving towards her. And that's the thing, I think in many ways in this era with small budgets, it was very hard to shoot gore effectively, but it must be said that there's something so effective about the way they shoot it, where they put on a face and hammer it into a face and the blood spurts out. And in many ways, that was probably a relatively easy effect to do, but because of the close-ups and sort of POV shot from Ace's perspective, played by Barbara Steele, it really feels uncomfortable. I think that's one of the things that you want in gore and kills in horror films, that sense that as the viewer you can sort of feel it, and there's something absolutely brutal about that method of execution, right? Nailing a mask to your face. It's also very effective, I think, sort of imagery, right? It gives this real sense that this is a demonic sort of a character, and it's interesting because she doesn't seem to be completely innocent by any means, right? Like she condemns her brother and all the people there, saying that she'll be returning one day to haunt them, and it's not maybe it is, but it wasn't totally clear to me that she was actually not at, that she wasn't actually really evil. I think she was, and so who knows, perhaps she actually does deserve the the treatment that she gets. But as I say, it is a wonderful, wonderful shot, and I think a fantastic way of, opening the film. So, and there's a little bit made of their inability to burn her because the rain comes down. I don't know if it's I think it's just sort of insinuated that is what sort of stops the destruction of her spirit and stuff. So very, very cool, very gothic horror type stuff. I guess it's probably confirmed at the end of the film that yes, that is the method by which we get rid of Satan, that burning him away, ironically, given the images of hell and all that kind of thing. So, what happens then? We cut to 1830, where there is a professor and his assistant. Was it Dr. Crouvaillon? Crouvaillon. They do really enjoy saying Crouvaillon throughout this film. So Dr. Crouvaillon and I think Andre maybe is like his assistant or something, and they're just in this most generic possible gothic horror situation, right? They're in this horse and cart. It's very obviously black and white, very, very, very dark, and what are they doing? I think they're going to like a conference or something. It's sort of just interesting, the idea of a conference in 1830, I suppose, and the very fact that they have to go through this sort of haunted area to get there. Or what is it? I think they have the option to sort of take slightly longer, but then the Crouvaillon makes the mistake of paying the what do you call them? I assume they're not called jockey, but the guy leading the horse, paying him to go through the sort of haunted area, which is just never a good idea in a gothic horror film, right? Or really you don't want to go through any haunted sort of wood or forest. It doesn't seem like the best idea. In the process, what happens? Oh yes, they come off because one of the wheels comes off. Let's call him a coachman. So this is all just a very good excuse for them to sort of wander around. And it's interesting, I think, how Crouvaillon is just so sort of blasé about the whole thing. Like, you just sort of wander around, and like then they end up in this crypt, and it's it's obviously very creepy. It's very dark. It's very gothic. There are cobwebs everywhere, and I can't remember if the actual tomb for Asa is open or they open it, but I believe that her mask is on, and Crouvaillon pulls the mask off, and they're not really particularly perturbed by the situation. So they pull the mask off, and the eyes have disappeared, but her skin is sort of almost like porcelain. She hasn't sort of deteriorated in any way except for her eyes, which, by the way, sorry about that, I'll get rid of that noise. Which, aside from her, obviously aside from the eyes, okay, so sorry, I've just got myself distracted here. The imagery of her lack of eyes, right? It's sort of that similar thing with Michael Myers, right? There's something so terrifying about a lack of eyes. There's a lack of emotion there, but even more interestingly than that, like this little can't say if they're crabs or scorpions that come out of the eyes, but so the assistant guy is sort of like, he makes note, right, of the fact that she hasn't rotted at all, or decomposed, but they just sort of move on, like, oh, whatever. It's just a very humorous sort of moment where, for a start, they've decided to disturb this crypt and take this mask off, and it's just, to me, it's just really bizarre. But whether it's done for this reason, it does sort of. I think it is an interesting tactic to sort of normalize the Gothic within a Gothic horror film, right? Or Gothic literature in general, where the characters within it are accepting of it. So yes, horrible things will happen in this movie, but just a mere corpse from 200 years ago that hasn't decomposed, that's not stressful enough for these people. And I think, interestingly as well, that Cravaillon seems to have a lot of information about who this person is, and he doesn't, and I think he even is aware that it's sort of the 200-year anniversary, and he just doesn't really seem at all perturbed by the situation. He's just pretty chilled out about it. So we do return to this tomb a number of times throughout the film, which, who knows, they don't seem to have a hell of a lot of different settings, but I think it is, look, this tomb / crypt, I should say, it's just such a very, very, effective Gothic horror scenario. And I think as well, I'll admit here that I'm not hideously familiar with like the Hammer horror stuff, but my understanding of it is, or my sort of key takeaway image from it, from what I know, is like tombs and crypts and people disturbing the dead and Christopher Lee appearing, and it feels very much. I mean, it's 1960, right? It's sort of either the height or sort of back end of that era of horror film, so it's very contextual as well. I think the whole thing very much has like Frankenstein vibes in terms of the black and white, the sort of melodrama of it all, and just obviously the exploration of the dead, right? Not or disturbing the dead and all the bad that can come from that. Like, as much as they can be melodramatic and maybe a little bit silly at times, I think it's also a very cool thing, a very interesting concept that there is a reason why this genre has been so popular, because everyone fears death, and everyone in some ways fears graves, I think, for this reason. And yeah, so as I say, maybe it comes off as a little bit melodramatic and a little bit silly, and maybe even a little bit tongue-in-cheek these days, but it's nonetheless, I think there's a lot of really effective stuff in this film. So then Cravaillon has sort of gets attacked by a bat, as we know in Italian horror films and probably horror films in general. Any scene ever that a character gets attacked by an animal just looks a bit shitty. It very much looks like a puppet just being held slightly out of shot by one of the crew, and that's exactly how this comes across. But nonetheless, he does shoot the bat. It does feel like it's really massive. Again, very Gothic horror type stuff. Exactly the kind of place that bats hang out, of course, in the dark and undisturbed places. But it's very, so in the process, Cravaillon cuts himself and ends up sort of, I believe some of the blood drops onto the corpse, and it's like the movie's not really hiding the ball here, right? That whole idea of like blood sort of reanimating corpses and stuff, and obviously, like, for what other reason is Cravaillon being cut here? It's, it's probably all a little bit silly, but nonetheless, to be honest, I think this whole sequence is really, really effective. The sequence that follows just after they've come out of the crypt, I really, really love the way the assistant, I'll go with Andre, comes across the new Asa. Because, and I must say, I think this part is played really, really effectively by Barbara Steele. I think in many ways the scene is trying to give off the impression that she's almost attempting to put a spell on him, right? She's got that weird distant thing, and I feel like anyone in this actual situation would think, oh, this woman's acting a little bit strange. She's talking very slowly, very robotically. I feel like she's not really blinking or anything. And the spell, of course, on Andre is very much that he's falling in love with her, sort of right in front of his eyes. There she is, and I just think that that's a really cool scene. I believe this is the version of the I think this is the sister. I don't know what her name is. Katia. Yeah, Katia. Sorry. This is Katia, but it's sort of interesting because I think the whole sort of thing about this film, the shtick is, that people and families in the area are being haunted for the execution of Asa at the start. But this scene sort of does a bit of legwork for that sense of uncertainty throughout the rest of the film, because as far as I know, this character is actually Katia, and I think it's simply a coincidence that she appears there right after they've disturbed the crypt. It isn't a coincidence that she looks exactly the same. I'm not exactly sure what the explanation is, other than that it's part of the cursing process. But it's more as if this scene is more for our aid, to just have that feeling of discomfort, I suppose, where we've got this character who is acting like strange as hell, but I think it just is Katya, and it's happened just right after they've disturbed the other Barbara Steele, and I feel like it's insinuating that not necessarily that Asa has control over Katya, but it feels, and now both times I've watched it, it felt the same. It feels like the scene is actually saying that this is Asa, which is sort of interesting. But after that, Katya just sort of becomes Katya, and that's it until the end. But then she survives, and it's all very romantic and stuff. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I think it's probably one of the staples of the Gothic genre as well. In many ways, they almost feel like, because I remember I've read some of the original sort of Gothic horror novels, and they often can feel like a modern day chick flick, but with everything being super dark, right? Like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies sort of thing, where it's still based around like these really cheesy romances. And this film it's not necessarily clear until right at the end, but in many ways this film is really just a cheesy romance. And as we know, cheesy romances are sort of very much rooted in melodrama and that kind of thing. And it is probably, obviously, secondary to the, I suppose, well, to the primary aspect of this film, which is, working at the curse and how are these characters going to survive, and just the Gothic horror of it all and the darkness, right? But nonetheless, it's still rooted in that probably rather silly sense of it being just a really generic love story, right? So Asa comes back to life, which is cool. And then the I don't even really know how to describe this. The zombie, I've got it here on Wikipedia. I think it's pronounced Jovatish. And I want to be careful to get my eras right, but I feel like again, there's probably going to be some people that get really annoyed at this because I might be factually wrong here. But I feel like at this point in horror history that zombies weren't conceptualized in the way they are now. And that they shifted with Night of the Living Dead in 1968. If I'm wrong, then I do apologize. I know in the sort of early black and white era that a zombie was like in the 30s, I think, when they first appeared. I think they might have even appeared in literature earlier than that. But they were more or less like people just under control, usually by like a sort of almost like a puppet master type, I suppose you'd say. And they would sort of do their bidding, and then sometimes at the end of them the control would be relinquished, and there'd be no actual physical changes, right? And this character almost feels like a Javatic, almost feels a little bit like a bit of an in-between there, because yes, I mean, I believe that he's reanimated, but there isn't an excess of makeup, but he feels somewhere in between one of those 30s zombies and like an actual zombie that we understand them as today. So in many ways it's very much like in the traditional zombie form, because they are doing the bidding, he is doing the bidding of Asa, but it's there's a degree of gore, right? I think he's got a little bit of blood on his face, but I must say I really, really love the way he plays it, right? That emotionless sense, and slightly wider eyes, the way that he wanders around. To be honest, I think it is really scary, in the context of what the film is, and yeah, so it's very much in that tradition of doing the bidding, right? Because he's like under the control of Asa. But I just think this is a really, really cool character, to be honest. Again, probably a little bit cheesy, probably a little bit lame, but nonetheless, I'm pretty happy. He makes his way to the castle, and I haven't made enough mention of the castle actually. So I think it's inhabited by Katia, her brother, her father, and a butler. There might be someone else that I'm missing there. And there's just something so gloriously Gothic about the castle. Again, I think because of the budgetary things, it doesn't always feel like you're in a castle. I think there are a few shots, a few sort of generic shots that are probably attempting to look more impressive than whatever the thing they actually were using was, where they would show it from outside and it'll look enough like a castle, but then on the inside it doesn't. It's not a constant reminder, but I guess it's sort of done with bluestone and stuff. So it's sort of castle-like. But anyway, this zombie character makes his way to the castle, and I think he's attacking someone, and I think he's attacking the father, right? And he shows him the crucifix, and then he recoils and disappears. So this is actually probably the first time I've actually mentioned it, but I guess this was part of what happened in, well, possibly what a lot of the Gothic genre is rooted in, right? It's often a very religious sort of process. Like, so my version of the movie that I have is called Black Sunday, but I sort of get the impression it's more commonly known as The Mask of Satan. I mean, in the actual thing, it actually says The Mask of Satan on the actual copy of the film itself. So right from there, it's obviously got religious undertones, but the brandishing of crosses as that symbolism to destroy the satanic force throughout the film becomes stronger and stronger. So it is rooted in, perhaps it's rooted in the sense of Christianity or religion in general being a net good for the world, but I think that probably reflects the times as well, that I think a higher portion of society was religious at the time, and just in general, I think that the way that people conceptualized good and evil was through the lens of Satan and, God at the time. And it's interesting. It's not. Yeah, this isn't something I've actually spent a hell of a lot of time thinking about, but it's interesting because I think that religion isn't sort of utilized in the same way, or certainly not with the same amount of regularity as it was back in those days, and it's probably reflective of a sort of a lessening of religion as a primary societal thing, and that we do conceptualize good and bad in a different way now. It was. I think that maybe that's part of what does date the Gothic horror film, is not necessarily the very presence of religion as a topic, but the very conceptualization of good and evil as a religious construct, I suppose. And the result of that, of course, is the amount of sort of brandishing of crosses and discussions of Satan and that kind of thing that tend to go on throughout this film. So Cruvayan, and this is the section of the film where we hear an awful lot of Cruvayan going on. So the father at the castle, strikes ill, and very ill actually, and I think there are rather, significant concerns that he's going to die. And I'll confess I can't remember exactly why Cruvayan goes back to the goes back to Ace's tomb, but he's back there for some reason. And see, it's interesting actually, because Cruvayan's he's like the most chilled out dude for the first half of this movie. Like he carries all the information seemingly, and the information's pretty terrifying. But he seems rather nonplussed by the whole thing, which is fine, I suppose. So for whatever reason, he ends up back at the tomb, and Ace sort of reanimates, looking very good for a 200-year-old corpse, and tells him, I can't remember the exact quote actually. Maybe I noted it down. I probably didn't. But anyway, she tells him basically that she can, I don't know if she can give him immortality, but she can give him something. He just has to give up his soul. Anyway, it's to that effect. And Cruvayan, for all his... See, it's interesting, right? Because I think part of the thing about this sort of historic dead witch concept is like that they can have some kind of mind control over you, right? Like Cartier seems to have some kind of mind control over Andre when he first lays eyes on her, but particularly this moment, the fact that Cruvayan decides that yes, he will do this, and he kisses her. I mean, it's at odds with the way Cravaillon has previously acted, but nonetheless, he is back at the tomb, and he also, maybe it's just that the scene isn't sort of constructed as well as it otherwise could have been, but no, there's something about the scene that sort of feels to me as if Cravaillon actually had his wits about him enough to make an informed decision, and his informed decision was to become an undead zombie. It's sort of humorous, and then, you know, the kiss with Asa is very sort of sensual and over the top. Again, he is he is kissing a 200-year-old reanimated corpse. It's probably best not to think about that, because, you know, Barbara Steele was looking pretty good at the time, but nonetheless, bad decision on the part of Cravaillon. So Cravaillon, I just really love the name and the way I feel like the script writers love the name as well, because they wrote it so much into the script, so much. He returns to the castle after everyone's been looking for him, right? Andre's been like, Cravaillon, where's Cravaillon? And he's returned to the castle, and quite clearly in a different state, right? Partly because it's black and white, it's not hideously obvious, but obviously we know what's been happening. But like, he has that sort of pale look, and that invasion of the body snatchers type presence, right? Where he's just sort of, he's there but he's not there, right? And he can talk. It's quite humorous because obviously none of the characters know that he's different. He's not the proper Cravaillon anymore. But like when the zombie guy, what was his name again? Yavatich. When the cross was brandished at him earlier in the movie, he like literally disappeared. It was so bad for him. He had to just get out of there straight away. Whereas this Cravaillon seems to have the ability to, like, you know, he acts strange when the cross is around and he can't look at it, but like he's able to be in the same area as it. It is sort of humorous. But so he is hanging around as sort of in a doctor-like capacity, because the son and the daughter, it's the son and Katia and Andre don't seem to be onto the fact that he's not in any kind of state, but not a human one anyway. And eventually this does end the father, because they find him sort of the next day dead. Just making mention of that little section of the film where Cravaillon's sort of getting around as this zombified version of himself. This does have a real sort of Gothic tendency in it, where what Gothic film and literature does at its most effective, I think, is normalize abnormality. So, whilst obviously the characters aren't onto the fact that he's all messed up, we are, and part of the Gothic, the shtick of Gothic horror is not always waiting for the horrific thing to happen, but watching the horror unfold in front of your eyes. So the horror is already the fact that he's now a zombie, right? It's not so much that it's the revelation that he's a zombie that's horrifying. It's that he is one, and we have to experience him in that state for a while. And that the very sort of horrifying notion or terrifying notion of the fact that he's in their presence, talking to them and stuff, but in a different capacity to what they realized. You know, it's like the horror is there, right? So eventually, the dad is found dead the next morning. I think, again, with some really, really effective makeup. And they find like little like holes in his neck. Now, I'm a bit vague about this. They do make mention of vampires at the start of the film. I don't know if the insinuation is that Cravaillon's a vampire, or that, these events are vampiric. I suppose they are, because there's bats and stuff as well, and there's crypts. But the whole vampire thing. I mean, look, maybe it is a vampire film, I suppose, but it's not made explicit, right? Or if it is, it's not sort of dwelt upon. It's more that vampires are an aspect of the Gothic. They're sort of intrinsically linked, the two of them. And as I said, I do believe that vampires are made mention of at the start of the film. But I don't think the film sort of attempts to be, this is a vampire film so much. Maybe you could argue that it is, but and obviously it's set in Romania and stuff, but I don't think it's so much trying to be exactly a vampire thing, right? I think it's in the horror. Sorry, it's in the Hammer horror sort of vampire tradition. It's in the Gothic thing. They do make mention of vampires. There's bats. There's crypts, but yeah, I think it's more that it's within that context. Anyway, I won't go too much further on about that. So, what then happens? I guess there's a lot more. There's a lot more action throughout the sort of latter stages of the film. That's right. There's a fair bit of like, what would you say, investigative stuff happening, like characters talking to each other about portraits and this. He looked identical to that person, and then there's that little girl who had witnessed. She witnessed. That's right. I think that's how Cravaillon goes back to the crypt. The zombie dude puts him in the coach, and I think that girl sees that happen, if that's right. And she's like, no, that's him. He's the man that I saw there. And then there's people looking at portraits, right? And it's all very interesting, sort of potentially like cheesily laid out type stuff, but nonetheless, it's all pretty enjoyable, right? That scene, in fact, yeah, I'll move back. In fact, I'm not. I'll confess, I don't know exactly. I can't remember exactly what part of the film this happens in. In fact, it is probably quite late. I think it's a fantastic moment. It's maybe. Well, look, I think there are three genuinely great moments in this film. It's the start with probably the entire opening sequence at the start with the mask into the face. It's the end, I think, where the stake burns down and falls over. I think that's sensational. And also the scene where Katya's father reanimates. Because, again, it's got that... There's a real sort of female in distress. I will say damsel in distress aspect to the melodrama of the Gothic horror film, right? And she is so distressed. It's just like that. I think she faints at the sight of him dying at first, while the men in the room sort of tend to her and make sure that she's okay, and literally grab her or hold her when she's falling to the ground, or that kind of thing. So, the film sort of constructs the idea of the father's death around that it's going to affect her the most, right? So she's sort of in tears, and she's all. I think she's just she's just seen some kind of very terrifying thing. I can't remember exactly what it is, but nonetheless, she's next to her father's, well, what she believes to be corpse, and I think she's like asking him for advice, but obviously she knows in inverted commas that he's not going to be able to respond. But then she notices that he is responding. And obviously, initially, this is really, really exciting. Not exciting, it's wonderful, but there's something really effective about the idea of, in a film, a person being devastated by the death of a loved one, only to be amazed and, profoundly happy that they're not dead, only then to be even more devastated and terrified by their reanimation. So she's in tears, and she's seeing her father, and she's trying to communicate with him, and he's all emotionless. But then he says, and I did get this quote, so she asks for her father, she asks him for help, and after he reanimated, he said, "I am no longer your father, my blood is no longer your blood." And I thought, wow, there's something so devastating about that. And again, as much as it's very much within the melodrama of the Gothic film, maybe that's how it gets away with being so on the nose. But there is something, like, it's such a profound thought, right? That, like, this fate of, everyone's loved ones, and everyone is going to die, and that's awful. But this fate that is actually more terrifying and more disturbing than that, the idea that the physical body still exists, but in a different capacity, and a terrifying, worse than death sort of capacity. And in many ways, the fact that he explains it to her is almost as if he has some kind of perverse enjoyment out of that fact, which is, again, I think is unbelievably cool. Again, it's very melodramatic and probably a little bit silly, but nonetheless, I think I just think that that's a wonderful, wonderful scene. So, yeah, there's a lot of other stuff that goes on. I think there's at one point they see the dogs have had their throat slashed. Apparently, right? There's that. I think it's right at the base of that. There's like a secret passageway, another very Gothic thing, a secret passageway behind a fireplace. And yeah, there's that scene where we sort of see the dogs, and they seem to be distressed, but it's only a little bit after that I think it's Andre explains that he saw that they'd had their throats cut. So maybe, again, that's sort of a limitation of the budget, the budgetary situation in the film. But, that's all pretty cool. Yeah, there's just a lot of drama and a lot of violence that sort of happens towards the end that I probably don't want to go into too much detail about all of it, because for a start, it's probably not my favourite aspect of the film. I guess there is a natural payoff that's going to happen with this kind of film, and everything does have to sort of reach something of a crescendo, but in perhaps contrast, let's say, to... So, actually, I just want to be clear here. Obviously, this is a relatively encompassing podcast where I am... there's a big difference between the Giallo and, say, the cannibal film, or even this film. But... So, I want to be clear, I'm very well aware that the whole thing, it isn't this sort of monolithic type thing where you'd expect the same structure. But nonetheless, as a director who would go on and do a lot of giallo films, the thing about the giallo is it would often sort of reach its crescendo and then rather dramatically end. It would give you a quick explanation and then you'd be gone. I feel like in some ways this film has a bit of a crescendo of violence and, you know, all kinds of characters killing each other and being killed. And then after that, we get the very satisfying, like we get more after that. So the initial crescendo is the violence, but then we end up in that situation where, so I'll just explain a bit of the plot just to clarify it. So Asa is basically, I think, trying to become Katya, like so she can sort of have an embodied life form to continue, I suppose, committing evil beyond the bounds of the film. It's a device that happens in film. I even remember it happening in Goosebumps. It came from beneath the sink, I think. This is a slight digression, but I have to talk about it. Where the father has been locked up by the fake father, who is like conducting experiments and stuff, and then at the end, the daughter, I think, has the option to exterminate one or the other of them, and she doesn't know which one it is. Now, it's a simplistic device, this whole which one is it, and they even do it in South Park, if for anyone who likes South Park. That episode, maybe, definitely the first 2 or 3 seasons, I think, maybe 4, where I think it's the Spooky Vision, the Spooky Vision episode where there are alternative evil versions of Stan and Kyle and stuff, and they end up blasting the wrong Cartman back. But anyway, well, the right Cartman, but they wanted the good one. It's simple, and it's probably a little bit silly, but the idea of a character in a film not knowing which is which and then having to kill one of them, and to be clever there, they, you know, which is which, she actually is a witch, that it just provides some wonderful drama. I think it's executed even better in this particular film because, to Andre's knowledge, he didn't realize he had a choice to make. So he's got what he thinks is Katya with him. They're back in the crypt again. As I said, they do spend a lot of time in this crypt, which is really, really cool. And so Ace is there pretending that she's Katya, and Katya is lying in the... Katya is lying in the tomb, and Ace is there sort of egging her on, I think, to kill her, and then he's about to or something, and he notices the cross on her neck, and it's this really great moment. And you know, it's sort of funny because you know this is, I don't know if anyone else has this. I'll pose the idea. When you're watching a horror film or just a film, and you know if the evil character notices that the good character notices, they're in trouble. And I often think, well, I like to think that if I were ever in that situation, if I'd realised that the evil character or the thing that was happening, I would do my best to make sure they don't realise I've realised. So in many ways, Andre is a bit of an idiot throughout this film. So I think for the most part, his noticing that the cross is on the neck of what he thinks is Asa. Now, the way he reacts could be him pretending that he doesn't realise because he doesn't want Asa to attack him. Or I think it's more likely that he's just an idiot, right? Like the very idea that he's aware that this witch has the ability to do a lot of these evil demonic things, and that she looks literally exactly the same as his beloved Katya. That it hasn't occurred to him that maybe she's swapped places is somewhat hilarious, and made even more hilarious by the fact that when he's got incontrovertible proof that obviously they have swapped places, he still can't quite get his head around it. Nonetheless, it is very, very sweet. The angry mob appears, and he tells them which one the evil one is, and then they go and get her. Again, another staple of the Gothic genre, the angry mob, and they're very they're always sort of torch-bearing, and they're always a little bit out of control. Like, I almost feel like the Gothic genre sort of originated the concept of the angry mob. And then we get into the final crescendo. The mob take Asa away, and they put her up on a stake, and poor bloody Andres with, I think, what is his father. And I haven't made much mention of the father because he's sort of just there as this person this wise, almost wizard-looking guy who, like a young wizard, who sort of gives us information that we needed from time to time. Nonetheless, Andre's looking out, and he's so devastated because, Katya, he's never going to find love, and Katya's died. And it's all very awful. And then, I can't remember the order, actually. No, that's right, yes. So they put her up on the stake, which I think is a cross, again, very, very symbolic, and they burn her. As she dies, the life form returns to Katya, which is great. And then, we have the lovely ending, and he goes and kisses her, and everything's just absolutely wonderful. And, it's very, very sweet, but it's like, am I watching a horror film at this point? Even if, when people survive in horror films, usually it's like everything's still horrible after it, right? They've been through this traumatic thing. But there's a real sense now, Andre gets to be with Katya, and who cares that her dad's dead? Her dad and her brother are dead, right? And then we get the final shot of the film. I sort of think it's so effective the way, they burn the absolute shit out of that steak. Pardon the cooking pun. The wooden steak. And I love the way it snaps and it so aggressively lands, right? They probably only had one shot of that. But nonetheless, it's it just has that real sense that she's just been absolutely destroyed, right? And all the stuff, all the evil, and all the failing of them having done it in the opening scene of the film, where the rain came and wrecked all their good work and kept her spirit alive. That they weren't making the same mistake this time, so it gives that real sense of finality. And it's also just a great shot. So, as I say, there are some really, really excellent shots in this film. It is perhaps a little bit melodramatic, but nonetheless, I think it's absolutely worth checking out. And it was enjoyable to rehash it after probably about, 12, 15 years since I'd actually watched it the first time. So that was really cool. And that pretty much concludes my discussion of Black Sunday, or The Mask of Satan by Mario Bava in 1960. So what I'll do, just before I wrap up, I did finally get my blog up and going. It there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think the buttons are working for the most part. I've got my it's like a 5,000 word essay from uni relating to Dario Argento's work. I'm not sure at this stage if I'm going to do sort of blog then podcast, or podcast then blog for the films. I haven't written something together yet for Black Sunday, because I've got 5 different podcasts and just worth mentioning, you guys should check out the horror/film science podcast. I think plenty of people will be interested in that if they're interested in this. But yeah, so I haven't had a lot of time because I've had a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, I did post that particular thing on the blog site, so check it out if you would like to. I will be attempting, eventually I will be, once I get everything sorted out in terms of time and organisation, I will be having weekly blogs. Certainly not all, if any, are going to be like 5,000 word essays again. I'll be doing different types of things. They might be short-ish, they might be just 100 or 200 words from time to time, I don't know. I'll put something together for Black Sunday, I think. Next week, what I'm going to do, I sort of have this idea that the big three of Italian horror directors are Argento, Mario Bava, and Lucio Fulci. So I thought what I'd do next week, so I really kicked into it obviously with all the Argento podcasts. I've now done a Bava one. I think what I'll do next week is I'll talk about Zombie Flesh Eaters by Lucio Fulci. It's probably his most famous film. I really, really look forward to doing that. Then beyond that, I think what I'm thinking is I'll either do in groups of three, like let's say 3 works of the same director in 3 consecutive weeks, or 3 films of a similar ilk. So say 3 cannibal films in the same in a row, or depending on. Like for example, like the Gates of Hell trilogy, The Beyond and the City of Living Dead, and what's the other one? I can't think of it. The early 80s Fulci films that came right after Zombie Flesh Eaters, like that kind of thing. I could do in one podcast where I talk about all 3 films. So I think that's what I'll do starting in 2 weeks' time. But next week I'll be talking about Zombie Flesh Eaters by Lucio Fulci, which I think anyone who would click on a podcast called The Italian Horror Guy and think this could be interesting, I think is the kind of person who's probably a fan of Zombie Flesh Eaters. So I really look forward to discussing that next week. And by all means, do please tune in, check out my website, which is going to be improving all the time. I think it looks good, but I need to add some buttons and stuff. But I'm really enjoying getting into this, guys, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast as well, and that you'll enjoy the blog as more and more of that goes up. Other than that, have a great week, and please tune in next week for the discussion on Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters.